Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to cover four very important topics which are related to the differences between certain terms which are used in pathology. And we need to be clear about these terms because in the diagnosis, unless and until we are clear about what each of this term pertains to, what are its characteristics, sometimes the diagnosis can be very difficult. Now, first of all, we are going to look at the differences between streptococci and streptococci microorganisms, because both of these, they belong to the same uh, class of bacteria, and they resemble a lot. Both of them are cocci, both of them are non-motile, non-sporing microorganisms, both are gram positive, and there is a lot of similarity between these two microorganisms. Although appearance wise and formation wise there are specific patterns which are related to each of these microorganisms, but the thing is, under specific conditions, sometimes the formations, even they resemble each other very much. So we have to differentiate, we have to know uh, which is the causative agent in a particular infection when we are dealing with a certain pathology. So let's look at the important differences between these two microorganisms. First of all, we know the both of these are gram positive microorganisms. Both are non-motile, non-sporing, and they are cocci. Now the difference starts. Let's see. First, there is the formation. Where formation is concerned, staph, they usually form clusters like grapes. If you look under the microscope, they form clusters just like grapes. Whereas the streptococci, they are found in the form of chains. Now, why is that? The thing is, staphylococci, their cell division is multi-axial. That means they can divide in any axis. They can divide vertically, or they can just divide horizontally, or in any diagonal plane. But the cell division of streptococcus, it is uniaxial. They just divide in one plane. So when they divide in one plane, the daughter cells, they are formed in a line, so they form chains. But as staphylococci, they divide in multiple planes, so there is a cluster of cells. So that is why the staph have a grape like appearance, whereas the streptococci, they are found in long chains. Now another important difference is that usually there are about 40 species of staphylococcus which have been identified against 50 species of streptococcus, those that have been identified. Then we move on. Very important difference between strep and staph is staphylococcus is catalase positive, whereas streptococcus is catalase negative. Catalase test is where the catalase enzyme, it converts hydrogen peroxide to water and oxygen gas, and this is possible. This reaction is positive in staphylococcus. They have the ability to convert hydrogen peroxide to convert it into water and oxygen, whereas streptococcus, they are catalase negative. They cannot do this, they cannot perform this reaction. So this is a very important distinguishing feature between strep and staph. Staphylococcus is catalase positive, strep is catalase negative. Now, another very important difference, although staphylococcus, basically they are aerobes. That means they require oxygen for their existence. But some of them are also facultative anaerobes. That means if there are adverse conditions, certain species of staphylococcus, they can survive in anaerobic conditions. Now, the streptococci, most of them, they are facultative anaerobes. Let me go. Most of these are facultative anaerobes and some of them are obligate anaerobes. That means that streptococcus, most of their members, they can survive in anaerobic conditions if such conditions develop. Most of their members have this capability to survive in these anaerobic conditions, and some of their members are even pure anaerobic microorganisms. So, strep has a more inclination, they are more well prepared for anaerobic conditions. Now, uh, if we look at Staphylococcus, they are basically found on the skin, whereas the streptococci, they are usually found in our respiratory tracts. Now, Staphylococcus, it can basically grow on any medium. You do not need to enrich a particular medium for its growth, whereas for a streptococcus, you have to enrich the medium. That means you have to put some extra enrichment substance into the ordinary medium so that streptococci can grow. Like in a simple agar, you have to you have to add blood to make it a blood agar. So streptococci, they need an enriched medium to grow, whereas staphylococci, they can grow on any medium. They do not require any special uh, conditions. Now, staphylococci, they exhibit no hemolysis. Some of them some members may show some hemolysis, and of what type? Beta hemolysis. Whereas streptococci, they exhibit all types of hemolysis, alpha, beta or gamma. All type of hemolysis can be seen in these microorganisms. And the staphylococci, many of them, they form the normal flora of our body. So generally, most of them are non-pathogenic, but majority of the members of the strep family, they cause disease, they are pathogenic. Now, the diseases usually related with staphylococci are food poisoning, skin infections, bacterial conjunctivitis, whereas with strep, it is throat, toxic shock syndrome, scarlet fever. And the thing is that basically strep is, I mean, both show a lot of severity where disease is concerned, but still, if we look at the members of both the groups, strep has got more severe pathogenic microorganisms in its family as compared to the Staphylococcus family. Now, let me see if we've covered everything. Yes, your Staphylococcus, it may have a capsule. It may have a capsule. It usually a capsule is not seen, but Staphylococcus, some members may have a capsule. But Streptococci, they have a hyaluronic acid capsule. And both of these microorganisms, they are oxidase negative. So these are some of the differences. Let me see if we can find some more differences also, because this is important, because you have to know these differences so you can distinguish between these two very similar microorganisms which are there. Okay, we have basically covered all of this. So now you have got a very good idea regarding how we can differentiate. The main difference is your catalase test. That is the test which immediately distinguishes between a staph and a strep. Rest of them, they are supporting. You can see there are a lot of differences which are specific to either strep or staph. And when we combine all these differences, when there is a diagnosis, especially in pathologies, when different samples come for analysis, so these are the different methods through which we isolate a microorganism. We then identify that microorganism, and then we facilitate in the diagnosis and ultimately the treatment of the patient. So this becomes very, very important to know what are the basic differences which are related with these groups. Now, another two terms which you have to distinguish, because again these are two types of arthritis which we see very, very commonly in our lives, and you see a lot of patients. Again, basically both these conditions are arthritis. They are related to the joints, and generally the patient is just going to come to you and he is going to say, look, I am suffering from joint pains. I can't move around. There is a lot of pain. There is no movement here. I can't stand or I can't lift certain objects. I mean, he is going to complain, and his complaints are going to be related to his joint pain and swelling. But now, obviously, we have to diagnose what sort of arthritis does that person have. There are a lot of arthritises. If you look in the book, there's a whole list of them. But the most common uh, arthritis that we encounter in our practical life are rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. So let's distinguish between these two so that we can immediately reach a diagnosis once we examine the patient as to which arthritis he is suffering from. Now let's go towards rheumatoid arthritis. Let's go through the different points and differences which are associated with these arthritis. Now, rheumatoid arthritis, it is an autoimmune condition, whereas osteoarthritis, it is a degenerative condition. That means there is wear and tear of the tissue which is taking place. Both are arthritis. In both of these cases, the joints are affected. But now we are going to see the differences between the pathologies, the sign symptoms, and the morphologies of these two arthritis. So, rheumatoid arthritis, it is an autoimmune condition, whereas osteoarthritis, it is a degenerative condition. That means there is wear and tear of the tissue going on. Now, the incidence of rheumatoid arthritis, relatively, you will see these are seen in a relatively younger age group, around 20 years of age. I mean, it can occur in any age, but usually predominantly you will see in the early years of life. Whereas osteoarthritis, because it is a degenerative disease, it has more association with years, with age. So usually it affects people after 40, 45 years, when the wear and tear and all that thing has settled into the joints. Etiology of rheumatoid arthritis, because it is an autoimmune condition, we don't exactly know what is the basic etiology which governs rheumatoid arthritis. Whereas where osteoarthritis is concerned, we can definitely see that long-term pressure on large joints is the main etiology, because degenerative disease, wear and tear, these are the words which immediately tell you what is happening to the joints. And as people age, as time passes, there is wear and tear, because those joints, those bones, they have been in use for so many years, and continuously for so many years, pressure, movement, weight, everything has been and is being applied on these joints, on these tendons, on these muscles. So obviously, like any other machinery, you are going to encounter wear and tear. There is going to be degeneration. Even if you look at some other machines, even your laptops or your phones, after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what happens? They just collapse. What do you say? They've become old, they've become outdated, everything is finished. So everything has a life, even human beings have life. So as time passes, these are the changes which you are going to see. So the etiology which is basically concerned with this, that is long-term pressure, which has been and is being applied on the larger joints. The larger joints, which are these? The weight-bearing joints. Now, if we look at rheumatoid arthritis, what we see is that rheumatoid arthritis, it affects multiple joints all over the body. Usually more than one joint is involved. Whereas in osteoarthritis, you will see that the involvement is usually one joint or the joints which are specific to a particular area. It is not going to be something which you will see all over the body. So osteoarthritis, typically you will see that usually the involvement is at a particular place or it is involving a particular joint. Whereas in rheumatoid arthritis, you will see multiple joints from all over the body, irrespective from what I mean, you are going to see them a lot of involvement of joints where rheumatoid arthritis is concerned. Now, in rheumatoid arthritis, what we see, which is, yes, you can see these complications can turn serious. What we see is there is extra articular manifestation also. That means that not only the joints in rheumatoid arthritis are affected, you will find systemic manifestations also. You might find fatigue, you might find fever, you might find other changes in your maybe in your eyes, maybe in your kidneys, maybe in your skin. So the problem is maybe in your heart. Problem is that in rheumatoid arthritis, that disease, it is not just limited to that joint, that it is just affecting them. Problem becomes that its manifestations, its effects are also felt outside the body, and other systems, they are also involved. So these extra articular manifestations, sometimes they can cause very serious problems. So again, if these complications develop, rheumatoid arthritis can uh, become a disease which is serious, and it requires immediate medical assistance. Where osteoarthritis is concerned, this is a pathology which is totally isolated to the joints. The pathology is there, and you will find no extra articular manifestations where osteoarthritis is concerned. So you won't find any fever, fatigue, or any other organ involvement where osteoarthritis is concerned. But where rheumatoid arthritis is concerned, extra articular manifestations are definitely going to be there. Now here there is a mistake in this. Uh, this point here, it is, although this is taken from the internet, but this just shows that yes, internet is a very good source of information, but again, you have to know your topic, you have to know what you are studying. You totally do not purely rely on the internet. I just wanted to I've put this thing so that to make it clear to you that the basic concept, the basic understanding of a certain subject is a must, and books are essential for that. Internet, it is just an assistance. Now here in the internet, this difference where they say there is no change in ESR, CPR, and anti-CCP. And they say in osteoarthritis, ESR, CPR, and anti-CCP may be elevated. This is wrong. This is totally on, this is technically ESR, CPR, and anti-CCP, they are elevated in rheumatoid arthritis. Your ESR is increased, your C reactive proteins are increased, and your CCP is increased. So In rheumatoid arthritis, all of these three parameters are elevated, whereas in osteoarthritis, all of these three parameters, that is your ESR, CPR, and anti-CCP, they are usually normal. So I just wanted, I deliberately wanted this chart because in your assignments, you did consult this chart, but please, not everything is correct on the internet. Please do consult the books. So this is a very major mistake and I wanted to correct it here so that you won't be making this mistake in the future. Your ESR, CPR and anti-CCP are elevated in rheumatoid arthritis, and ESR, CPR and your anti-CCP, they are usually normal in your osteoarthritis. Now, let's see how can these be treated. Usually, rheumatoid arthritis, it needs immune suppressants because it is an autoimmune disease. So, to counter that, you need those medications which are going to suppress this immune response. Whereas immune response immune response suppressants, they do not work on osteoarthritis because osteoarthritis is a degenerative disease. There is no autoimmune element in this disease. So these are the major differences. Now let me add a few of my own. Let's see if we have covered all of these differences. We'll go back and I will reiterate these because a lot of differences are given, but some of them, yes, let me reiterate. Another thing, speed of onset. Where rheumatoid arthritis is concerned, uh, it it has a relatively rapid onset. Usually over weeks and months, rheumatoid arthritis sets in. Whereas if you look at osteoarthritis, it is a process which takes years. It is a slow, insidious process which takes years and years to build up and to show the effects of the pathology. Now, another important thing where these two are concerned, in rheumatoid arthritis, it is the synovium which is basically affected. The first thing, the major thing that is affected in rheumatoid arthritis is the synovium. From there, then the pathology spreads and it involves the cartilage. Whereas in osteoarthritis, it is the cartilage which is the basic target. It is the basic tissue which is involved. And as the pathology progresses, then from the cartilage, the pathology spreads onto the synovium and to the surrounding tissue. Now, the process through which these two pathologies work. Now, rheumatoid arthritis. In this, the process is that of inflammation. Whereas in osteoarthritis, the process is that of degeneration. This is a misnomer where the name of osteoarthritis, itis, is concerned. It's a misnomer. There is no inflammation where osteoarthritis is concerned. It is a degenerative disease. There is no inflammation. So it's a misnomer, but still the name is being used. It's still known as osteoarthritis. But the pathology, basic pathology, is degenerative in osteoarthritis and it is inflammatory in rheumatoid arthritis. Now, let's see regarding the joint symptoms now. Where rheumatoid arthritis is concerned, the joints are going to be painful, they are going to be swollen, and they are going to be stiff. It's an inflammation. So just correlate with that thing. Whereas osteoarthritis is concerned, what you are going to see, yes, there is going to be joint aches and pains in the joint, but the tenderness, when you touch the tenderness, may or may not be present, and usually swelling is not there. There might be a little swelling in some cases, but usually there is no swelling. Now, the most commonly affected joints. In rheumatoid arthritis, it is the fingers and the feet. And in the osteoarthritis, it's basically the weight bearing joints like the knee, the spine, the hip, and even ultimately the hands. Now, in the hand, the main involvement in rheumatoid arthritis are the proximal interphalangeal joints, whereas in osteoarthritis, it is the distal interphalangeal joints. Now, if we look at the joint characteristic in rheumatoid arthritis, what we see is the joint is soft, warm, and tender, all the signs of inflammation. Whereas in osteoarthritis, as it is a degenerative process, the joint is hard and it is bony. Now, if we look at the pattern, how the different joints are affected. In rheumatoid arthritis, already we have discussed multiple joints are involved and the involvement is of a symmetrical type. Whereas in osteoarthritis, the involvement of the joints is asymmetrical. A particular joint, a particular area is involved. Multiple joints are not involved. So it has an asymmetrical involvement. Now, pain with movement. What we see is in rheumatoid arthritis, pain decreases or disappears with movement. Whereas in osteoarthritis, pain increases with movement. Now, regarding joint stiffness. Now, where joint stiffness is concerned, in rheumatoid arthritis, we have what we call morning stiffness. When the patient wakes up in the morning, his joints are stiff. That means joints are worse after resting. So once he gets up and becomes active, usually this stiffness goes away. But usually this stiffness, it lasts longer than 1 hour. It takes more than 1 hour for this stiffness to gradually disappear. Whereas in osteoarthritis, we call it evening stiffness because it becomes worse after and effort after some work is done. And the morning stiffness in osteoarthritis, it stays for hardly for 30 minutes, not more than 30 minutes. After that, it wears off. Now, Heberden notes, these are absent in rheumatoid arthritis. They are characteristic of osteoarthritis. And these are different medications which are tried on patients who have rheumatoid arthritis. Where osteoarthritis is concerned, simple NSAIDs are the drug of choice for osteoarthritis because the other medication, it is not necessary as the pathology does not require it. So these are important differences between rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. Now, let's come down to another very important differentiation, that is between acute and subacute infective endocarditis. Now, again, endocarditis, this is basically inflammation of your endocardium. Now, one of its common varieties are acute and subacute, and then there's a chronic variety. Chronic variety we can easily diagnose. It is something which is there for a prolonged period of time with a previous history. Problem sometimes comes where acute and subacute cases are there. So we have to differentiate whether this is an acute case or a subacute case. Because when the patient comes to us, we don't know. We have to take the history, but still we have to rely on our own history on our own examination. Sometimes the facts which are given by the patient, they are not correct. So we have to use our own minds and we have to use our own judgment where these things are concerned. Now let's look at acute and subacute. First of all, in acute endocarditis, high virulence organisms are used, and the most common organism is Staphylococcus aureus. Whereas in subacute endocarditis, low virulence organisms are usually involved. Basically, which one? Streptococcus, and which belong to the alpha hemolytic group. Now, let's look at the heart valves. Person who is suffering from acute endocarditis, the valve usually in most of the cases is going to be normal and healthy. Yeah, that means before the disease occurred, that person had a normal healthy valve, a heart valve. In some cases there might be some deformity, but in majority of the cases you will find a normal healthy valve which was there, on which acute endocarditis happened. Whereas in subacute endocarditis, the heart valves, they are always going to be deformed. So subacute cases develop on heart valves which are already deformed. Now what is going to be the response of the body? In cases of acute endocarditis, you will see necrosis and ulceration because there is going to be acute inflammation. It's endocarditis, itis. So it is inflammation. Just remember all the changes which occur in the that occur in inflammation. So in acute cases, you will find all the sign symptoms which are related to inflammation. So you will find necrosis and ulceration where acute endocarditis is involved. In subacute, you will find a local inflammatory reaction because it is going to be a relatively weaker reaction because the microorganism is of low virulence. So the inflammatory reaction will be a local one and it might not be as severe as that in a purely acute case. Progression in acute endocarditis, the destruction is rapid and it is very destructive. It is an acute. It does not give time for the adaptive processes to set in usually. It is a very rapid process and it's a very destructive process. Whereas in subacute cases, the progression is slow and it is relatively less destructive. So some adaptive processes may come into play, and so in subacute, process is slow, virulence is low, so process is low, destruction is low. The severity is not that much as compared to the acute case. Now, if you look at the outcome of the disease, you will see in acute endocarditis, death is seen in 50% of the cases. That means half of the people die. Whereas in subacute cases, usually death is rare. It's very, very rare. These people recover when you give them antibiotic treatment. Now, apart from these differences, let me add a few more so that uh, you are all more well versed. Now, if we look at the sign symptoms, in acute case, because it is acute inflammation, you are going to see a high grade fever, you are going to see chills. I mean, all the sign symptoms which are associated with acute inflammation. You'll see arthralgias, you'll see myalgias, you might even see abdominal pain. That patient might experience pleuritic chest pain or back pain. Whereas in subacute, fever is not going to be high, it is going to be of low grade. There might be some weight loss, there might be some anorexia, some fatigue, maybe some arthralgias and myalgias, but the symptoms are not going to be so severe. Onset, we have already seen in acute cases, it is very rapid, whereas in subacute cases, it is relatively slow. Now, Organisms we have already discussed. There are high virulent organisms, whereas in subacute cases, there are low virulent organisms. Now, in acute endocarditis, underlying, there might be no underlying heart disease present. Heart may be normal, but in subacute cases, you will find an underlying heart disease like rheumatic heart disease or some congenital heart disease, due to which there is a deformed valve on which subacute pathology has occurred. Now, if you look at the toxicity in acute inflammation, it will present as an acutely toxic patient, whereas a subacute patient, it will show mild toxicity. That patient will not show severe toxemia. Now, if we look at the focus of infection, where acute cases are concerned, the focus of infection is going to be well defined. Usually, it is extracardiac, it is present somewhere outside the heart, and from there, the infection reached your cardiac system. In subacute cases, again, the infection is well defined, but it is usually present within the heart. You will not find the source of infection somewhere outside the heart. It is not going to be extracardiac, whereas in acute cases, it is going to be extracardiac. Then, looking at the valves. Now we know in endocarditis, there are vegetations on the valves. In acute endocarditis, the vegetations are going to be large, bigger in size. Whereas in subacute endocarditis, the vegetations are small in size. Bacteremia. In acute endocarditis, bacteremia is going to be very, very severe. Whereas in subacute, bacteria may be present, but it is going to be in a very mild form. And basically, these are the extra points which I wanted to convey to you. Now, if you look at endocarditis, you can very easily distinguish between these two very important varieties of infective endocarditis, because it is essential that we recognize which is which, and you can see that the intervention, the treatment and the prognosis, it very highly depends on your diagnosis, because in acute cases you see the death rate is very, very high. It is nearly 50%. So we have to know which type of endocarditis is there, so that we can immediately intervene, start treatment, and save the life of the patient. Now, before we go any further, there is another which I thought difference which we should definitely look into. I don't have a slide here, but still, I will go through it with you. This is the difference between dilated and hypertrophic cardiomyopathies. Now, you know, cardiomyopathy is where there is some sort of a pathology which is primarily present in the myocardial muscle. There is no other relevant pathology due to which the myocardium has been affected. In this, the pathology itself is within the myocardium. So, it has three important types. There's the dilated type, the hypertrophic type, and the restricted type. But the two most common that you are going to see are the dilated cardiomyopathies and the hypertrophic cardiomyopathies. Now, again, you have to distinguish which is which, and how can we see how to differentiate between the two varieties. Now, in dilated cardiomyopathies, as the name states, the heart is dilated. It has become a bag. Now, there is what do you say? There is severe dilatation of the heart chambers, but the heart valves, they are not affected by this dilatation. Usually, there is no abnormality as such seen in these heart valves, but due to the dilatation, the elasticity of the heart is compromised. Whereas in hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, the heart is enlarged and you will find asymmetrical hypertrophy, especially in the subaortic region of the heart. Now, the problem is the hypertrophy. It is so thick that what it does is in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it affects the filling up of the heart. So, in dilated cardiomyopathies, the systole of the heart is affected. In hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, the diastole of the heart that is affected. Now, if you look at the cause, usually uh, for your dilated cardiomyopathies, there can be a number of causes. There can be some metabolic problem, there can be some infectious problem, there can be some pleural pathology. I mean, there can be a lot of causes which can lead towards a dilated cardiomyopathy. Whereas in hypertrophic, usually this is inherited. There is some sort of a mutation in the genes. So in majority of the cases, usually you will find some sort of a link with the genetic diseases. Now, if we look at the prevalence, uh, the dilated cardiomyopathies, they are seen more in newborns, and there is a higher ratio of occurrence between the males as compared to the females. Where hypertrophic cardiomyopathies are concerned, here you will find them in young adults. Now, basically, the let's see where is the location of the pathology. In dilated cardiomyopathies, it is the ventricles which are basically affected. They become dilated. In hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, it is the subaortic area, the septal area, and the anterior wall which is affected. But in dilated cardiomyopathy, it is the whole ventricle which is affected by this. Now, the very important things which the important differences that we see. If we look at the cardiac output, in dilated cardiomyopathy, cardiac output is markedly decreased because the systole is compromised. Whereas in hypertrophic, the cardiac output is normal because the systole is fine. It is the diastole which is affected. Now, the end diastolic volume of left ventricle, it is increased in dilated form and it is normal in hypertrophic form. Why it is increased in dilated? Because the heart has enlarged and it has dilated. So the volume has increased. So the end diastolic volume, the volume has increased. That is why the end diastolic volume which is there, it is increased due to the dilatation. Because of the hypertrophy, the end diastolic volume that remains normal. Now the end systolic volume, again, it is increased in dilated hypertrophies and it is decreased in hypertrophic cardiomyopathies. Now, if we look at the stroke volume, the amount of blood which is pumped out per beat, in in dilated, stroke volume is markedly decreased, whereas in hypertrophic, it is normal or it might be increased. But the increase is not that high. Then we look at the ventricular filling pressure. In dilated cardiomyopathies, the ventricular filling pressure is markedly increased. Whereas in hypertrophic, the pressure is normal or there may be slight elevation to the pressure. Now, the chamber size in dilated cardiomyopathies, the ventricular chamber size is markedly increased, whereas in hypertrophic type, the chamber size may be normal or it might be decreased if the hypertrophy is very, very prominent. Ejection fraction in dilated heart, because it is not pumping properly, the ejection fraction is markedly decreased, whereas in hypertrophic, because the systole has become very powerful due to the hypertrophy, the ejection fraction is markedly increased. Now, the diastolic component in dilated heart, it can be normal because the filling is all right, or it might be decreased. But in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it is markedly decreased. If you look at the mortality, you will find that the dilated cardiomyopathies, uh, 1 year mortality in 50% of cases. That is not that much. But in hypertrophic, frequent cause of sudden death is definitely seen, especially in younger patients. So, where mortality rate is concerned, hypertrophic is relatively more dangerous as compared to your dilated heart. Again, if you look at the treatment of both these things, the problem is in dilated heart, you have to treat the heart failure which is associated with it. You might have to give vasodilatation. You have to control the different type of arrhythmias if they are, and uh, if and in severe cases surgery might be needed. Whereas in hypertrophic heart, symptomatic treatment like beta blockers, if there is atrial fibrillation, you correct that. If any surgical intervention is needed, then you do that. Otherwise, digitalis, nitrates, the other vasodilators and other cardiac medicines are used in this thing. So these are the basic differences which are between these two cardiomyopathies. So these were four important topics that I wanted to cover, because they give you an idea what are the basic differences between some very common diseases, which if we look at a glance they appear to be very similar, but now you know there are very distinct differences between all these in all these pathologies. Thank you so much, and Allah Hafiz.